Ya, halo, 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 halo teman-teman, selamat datang di SSR Talks ya. Jadi selamat datang buat teman-teman yang di YouTube, selamat datang. Kita akan melakukan sesi ini. Ini adalah episode ke-8 dari SSR Talks. Mungkin buat teman-teman yang baru join, SSR Talks-nya adalah sesi di mana kita mengundang narasumber dari yang bekerja di luar negeri untuk nge-share ilmunya ke kita di Indonesia gitu. Nah, sebelumnya mungkin perkenalan dulu, namaku Wafi. Aku saat ini bekerja sebagai Technical Director di Agate. Nah, kalau sebelum-sebelumnya kita udah pernah ngobrol dengan animator, dengan karakter designer, lalu dengan product manager, publishing manager. Nah, kali ini kita akan ngobrol dengan narasumber mungkin bukan dari Indonesia tapi dari temannya yaitu dari India. Nah, kali ini akan bertemu dengan 3C designer yaitu dia juga bekerja di Ubisoft. Nah, tapi karena kali ini kita ngobrol dengan teman dari India, tamu dari India, jadi kita akan ngobrol kali ini dengan bahasa Inggris ya, jadi akan bilingual. Nanti mungkin teman-teman yang mungkin kurang bisa mengikuti bahasa Inggris, nanti akan aku summary-kan juga dengan bahasa Indonesia, tapi mungkin materinya akan dibahas secara bahasa Inggris gitu ya. Nanti silakan buat teman-teman juga nanti di penghujung acara akan ada announcement, beberapa pemberitahuan juga. Nah, langsung aja kita sambut, mungkin buat kita sambut aja ke guest kita. Please welcome our guest today is Mr. Chandra. Hello, Mr. Chandra.
Uh, Hello.
Hello, Mr. Chandra. Okay, how are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Okay, cool, cool. So, how is COVID in your place?
How's
Is the
sorry?
situation good? So, how is the condition in your place? Is you are still going work from home, or are you now working from office?
We at Ubisoft have a hybrid model right now where we are
Oh, I
doing
see.
60/40, where we go in 3 days per week, and 2 days we work from home. We're just testing the waters right now. We do not know if this will work out or not.
Oh, I see, I see. So you are transitioning into a hybrid
Yeah.
model, right? Hybrid working. Okay. Okay. So please, can you please share about your story to our audience, like your journey in game development before working in Ubisoft?
Oh yeah, sure. I'm like a lot of you guys. I grew up playing video games, and I used to spend a lot of time with level editors, especially. And Little Big Planet was one of my first games where I made my own levels and then I published them online, and I saw people playing it, and I'm like, holy shit, that's cool, super cool. And
Okay.
Halo was another one, and um, as time went by, I just got into a university in India. It's called as Rubik Kasupinfo game, and then I studied over there for 5 years. Then I got myself a job at EA while I was studying, and then I got myself another job at Ubisoft, and yeah, so that's how I transitioned. That's it.
Okay. Cool. Cool. Okay. So right now you are working as a 3C designer, right? Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah.
Okay. So can you tell us about what is your aha moment when you like, okay, I want to be a 3C designer rather than the general game designer? Is there any specific moment in your career
Yeah,
where you
there
decided to
is.
do?
Uh, for people who don't know, I started off as a mobile free-to-play game designer, and I transitioned into AAA by working on Starlink. I think was my first AAA game, and then Prince of Persia. When I was working
Oh,
on
Prince
that
of
game,
Persia.
I was handling everything about the prince, the three C's of that game, and a lot of other things. And since I was also working on a lot of other things, I was always excited for one thing is what I noticed in myself, which was three C's.
Hmm.
And I was like, yeah, I want to do this and I want to get good at this.
I see, I see. So that is your transition to becoming 3D designer, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so before we are going to the presentation. I think Mr. Chandra already prepared a very cool and lengthy presentation for us to learn more about how to become a 3D designer and what kind of fundamental we need to learn. And okay, so before we start, maybe for audience who are watching and you want to ask, you can also ask the question in the comment section, and we will, if we have time, we will also ask the question to Mr. Chandra. Okay, thank you. So please share us your knowledge about 3D design. Okay,
Okay, I'll share my screen then. Give me a
okay, of
second.
course.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Not yet, not yet. I think. Okay, okay. So
Is it?
okay, okay. It's good. It's good.
Okay. So, I'll start off. Um, for an introduction again, hello everyone. My name is Chandra Kouns Turaga, a 3C game designer from Ubisoft Stockholm. I would like to say that it's really nice to have this opportunity to meet and present this talk to you all, as I personally think uh, SEA countries, Indonesia especially, holds a lot of untapped talent. So let's get
Okay, thanks.
started.
Of course.
I think it's fair to talk a little bit more about myself before I begin with, and let's do that. Here's a bit of my history. I started off as I was saying before, I started off as an intern at EA, and then I progressed on to being a game designer at Ubisoft India, and then I ended up as a 3C game designer at Ubisoft Stockholm. In total, I have around 4-ish years of experience now while working on AAA and F2P mobile games. Along the way, I've acquired a wide range of skill sets while working on titles such as Visual, Trials Frontier, Starling Battle for Atlas, Prince of Persia Sands of Time Remake, and now we're working on a Ubisoft Scalar cloud technology game with, I would say, amazing industry professionals on the side working towards building something which I believe can shake the industry at least. Anyways, before I dig into 3C as a topic, I think I need to explain what 3Cs are and where that term comes from for people who do not know about it. If you've been working in the video game industry, or if you're a student, or if you're just some passionate gamer, you might have come across the term 3C in one way or the other. Now, there's no documented history for this, uh, but 3C as a term believed to have originated from Ubisoft. 3C in summary refers to game design related to your character, controls, and camera. But 3C is not just saying character controls and camera. I see a lot of people doing that. I see 3C as more of a methodology to derive how you design your game, establishing a connection between the player and the screen. How does the camera enable you to see your character to control? I would say bedrock relative to building fundamentals on how a game should function. Following that, I would like to add that 3C constructs the core interactions of a game. Now, different studios set the designation per their team and project requirements. Uh, some studios call it player designer, some studios call it gameplay designer. I recently heard that uh, ID Tech, IT Tech, Bethesda, they call it as TGE. It's basically saying through the gun experience because they work on a lot of first person games. As core interactions, 3Cs make or break your game. The execution of 3C may even define the project's ultimate success, but this statement is highly accurate to maybe platformers in comparison to adventure games. Like in this example, which with match 3 match games, where simply changing from tap to swipe to connections could drastically change the gameplay experience and directly affect your target audience. And there's no set pattern to follow for success. You could have a game focused on character like Joel in The Last of Us, where every action and beat in the game is focused on enhancing the character interactions between Ellie and Joel. Or you can have a game focused on your controls, like what Flappy Bird did, with heavy emphasis on motor skills. Or you can have a game focused on camera, like God of War, where the whole experience was focused around delivering a one shot experience. Whatever your focus may be, it's most importantly, 3Cs are interconnected. And with that, I'll begin to explain individually what character controls and camera entails for each section. I'll start with camera first. So all all facets of 3C depend on the type of game you wish to make. Especially character, the changes get vast and wide. And when it comes to individual features, your intentions and benchmarks would largely define your end result. This is a complex point. Defining characters type, appearance style. I think I'll go one by one on this one, starting with defining characters and types. You can research on the type of character you wish to have in your game. You want a humanoid character, a dog, or an octopus? I don't know. More options, you do you. What you define as a character is up to you. The only difference is whether if you can control the character or not, that changes things. As an example over here, do you want to have two characters in your game? Like in this example where you have a man and a wolf, and you can control both of them. And this in turn has major implications on your world and character interactions. As you can see on the left picture, you can see a geometric cutout made for a wolf to fit through. That is a level designer considering of wolf's size and actions to make it so that it's possible that the wolf can fit through. And you can see on the second picture how the wolf is supporting the main character by mauling enemies, enabling cooperative play between the character and the wolf. Dead to Rights is an awesome game, by the way. I love this game. Very underrated. And let's say, what if there's more than two characters, like Pikmin, where the player could control multiple characters at once? It's really fun to look at them wobbling around on screen. I say you do you. I see no problems with it. And even when you say you want to have a humanoid character, as we all know, there could be vast different types of human characteristics, appearances and sizes, like Kratos in this example, where he was highly acrobatic in the earlier God of War entries, but in the later iterations he seemed more mellowed down and old. That change usually comes with the type of game they wanted to make, and in turn also has heavy impact on 3C. So it's interconnected. Character can also be a subset for defining a lot of actions and abilities, like in this case with Jedi Fallen Order, where the character can apply a force pull, or the character can walk on beams, as you can see, and also deflect bullets. And also take notice of the buddy robot on his back, which is responding to the character's actions. Secondary motions like this go a long way in providing a polished AAA feel to your game. Detailing on world interactions like in Anthem, where like how character affects water and environment, fauna and everything. Or look at Uncharted Nathan Drake. Look at the skid marks he's leaving on the floor, the rope dangling on his waist, and how the character generally enters from sliding to rope climbing to a hanging position. Now, all of these are a fine balance and most time taking aspects of 3C. But these elements are mostly what your players will connect with. So make sure you nail them right. Your character will in turn define the world and many other systems around in the game. If you ever thought about doors in real life versus doors in video game, you'd know how everything is made according to the character, as per as in real life we have a lot of considerations for general human sizes and ergonomics and everything. It's vastly different. Metrics are very essential to everything about defining your game world. Keep that in mind, research about them and also nail them right. Finally, I'd like to add that it's not enough to say who's your character. Could be anyone. It's more about, as I've explained before, it's how you plan out your character inclusive of actions, enabling control inputs and camera states. That's what I have for character section. I'll go to the next one, controls. Controls are not just about defining button mappings or control schemes. I see a lot of people just say that and leave it at that. It's more about understanding how players interact with your planned device. Like in this example, with Overwatch, with Hero Cole Cassidy, notice the difference in how the character enters into his ultimate Deadeye mode. The character is slowed down, can't jump high. And now the question is, how do we exit this control state? And what happens when you do exit without completing the full duration of that ultimate? This is where you realize how controls influence character and character influence back onto controls. This is also applicable for camera, which I'll explain as we go ahead. I have another complex point again filled with information. I'll go through them one by one, starting with ergonomics. There's a certain layer of ergonomics logic already laid onto our input devices. But as designers, we need to realize how to make best use of them to create good controls. Have you ever wondered why your input devices are made around your thumb and your index finger? Do you ever think about how far your finger needs to travel to hit a button? These questions become valid when you're trying to match the actions to ergonomics. For example, placing a reactionary dodge action nearby a pinky finger on your keyboard would be harder to achieve compared to placing it on thumb finger on a controller, nearby thumb finger on a controller, because pinky finger is simply not as powerful and precise in comparison to thumb finger to react as exactly how you need it to. But not every player uses your input device as you expect them to. And although you can't estimate how someone holds your input device, for the sake of enabling self expression, ultimately I would say it's just better to focus on providing accessibility support to enable all types of players to play your game. And when I say all types of players, it's also important to know how player interactions with an input device can change by age. And accessibility is also finding solutions to include all age groups in video games. Have attention limits now. You can have n number of actions, and the player might have the attention space to only remember few at a time. And not all actions are equivalent in their skill to execution ratio. As a player, you go through the loop of not knowing an action exists in the game to you being aware of it and then you slowly mastering it. Now we've come to a point where players have been subconsciously trained to move characters through multiple iterations of video game we've had through the history, almost as if they've formed habits to a point where we don't need to teach them how do you run in a game. And similarly, you would eventually want to get to a point where your players can master all of your game controls to the point where they form subconscious habits, from actions to subconscious habits. That's what you're looking for. It's important to understand the human processing model, which basically refers to how players provide input, how the system perceives the input, and how the players respond to the system again. I also want to take a moment and talk about the how the system processes the input part and how we as designers deal with it, aka input lag is one way. Uh, Modern Warfare 2, played in the best conditions, has an input lag of around 100 milliseconds. Battlefield 3, on the other hand, the direct FPS competitor at the time, has an average of around 160 ms. And when you put them both side by side as competitors, COD, Call of Duty feels much more tighter to control than Battlefield. And subsequently, later on, Battlefield 4 went on to an average of 95 milliseconds, putting itself back in competition with the FPS race. Uh, but I would say that an important point to note, not every game needs to revolve around 100 milliseconds of input lag. It is completely fine for it to be higher if your gameplay pillars allow support for it. I've added these examples for everyone to maybe think about it. What makes a game sluggish? See how you can answer that question to your game. Relatability is one of the biggest factors or the biggest factors while designing your controls. L2 and R2 in this example have predominantly been used for aim and shoot in shooters, and you simply cannot go around and break the mental model built by other games for years on end, where you are now like, hey, I want to put aim on A and shoot on B or something like that. It doesn't work out. Although I'm using the same example over here, the example of L2 and R2 also makes you feel like you're zoomed in and you have a trigger ready to shoot. And my other point was connecting controls to your gameplay experience will subsequently enhance immersion. But there are times when feeling and immersing yourself with the controller might not work out as you expect, as with the example in Spider-Man over here, where the game asks you to slam the square button for Spider-Man to employ force to stop the car. And I've said before, with the accessibility point, there might be a cohort of your audience which who might not even be able to do this action. How do you handle that scenario then? How do you make them have the same experience as everybody else? Think about it and try and find a fine balance where everybody can play the game as you intend them to. That I have, I'll go to camera section next. This point is especially valid for student. I've seen a lot of people doing that. Stating camera view by itself is not enough. Although camera view plays a big part of the equation, it's more about understanding how the camera exists and supports the overall gameplay experience. Like in this example, which with match 3 games, we have a landscape match 3 game on the left and a portrait match 3 game on the right. I think it's Gardenscape versus Candy Crush. Simply changing the camera view completely transforms your core interactions, gameplay experience, and your overall target audience. It's a different experience altogether. Okay, this point we need to correlate camera inputs and character actions to make them harmoniously sync together. What I mean by that is, in this example, we have Mario, a very old game, and you can still see how the camera focuses on supporting gameplay, where depending on which direction the character is looking at, facing at, the camera also provides ample space to see what's coming ahead, so players can anticipate their movements and actions and everything. And around 20 years later, we still employ these techniques in modern AAA games as well. As you can see, similar intentions being employed with Horizon Zero Dawn, where the camera, depending on which direction Aloy wants to run at, the camera also focuses to showcase that direction accordingly. Camera framing is one of the most underrated aspects of the 3Cs. Many people do not understand what it takes to think about such framing and how do we bring this to life. But camera design, though, is more than framing. A lot of elements come together to enhance immersion. Elements like how transitions blend between each other, like in this case with Gears of War, where the main character goes from a roll to a roadie run, is what it's called, to a regular walk. Or elements like effects, like in this case with Need for Speed Most Wanted, where FOV, motion blur, depth of field, and more come in to enhance the sense of speed or enhancing the overall immersion in general. Clunky camera is the resultant of players noticing the camera barrier between character and controls. Now, I have a recent example for this one, uh, and I'll try and take you guys through this video to make clear sense of what is a good camera versus a bad camera. S- Straight from the get go, you see the character being in focus instead of the enemies around him. And because the character is out of focus, the player would not be able to react to attacks initiated outside of camera view. Like in this case, where the big guy charged an attack from outside of the camera view and is coming in to hit the player. And since the player doesn't know about the attack's existence, he takes the hit because he was in between of doing another action, and now he's recovering. Not really his fault, but he's took the hit. Now I want to talk about the execution over here. Oh, oops. Yeah, this execution over here. This looks really cool, the execution, but oh my god. Yeah, this looks really cool, but right after that, the camera is not focused on the experience. It takes time for it to recover and showcase the enemies again. And during that time, the character takes a hit. Now we have the biggest enemies of camera design, a wall collision. The game shows no effort in showing enemies from this angle, and as a result, the player can only react to what's in front of him. Oops, the video, man. But the player can never see attacks coming outside of the camera view, like in this case. And I would like to add that at the end is what happens is we end up with a camera where you're not only fighting with the enemies around you but also fighting with the controls and the camera to figure out and frame yourself, because the game is not doing that for you when you need it to. For Honor is a really good example in this case, where it tries to keep the action space always clear. They have something called as a wall cut technology, where the camera just goes into walls to smoothen out the claustrophobic environments. Now, with that said, I have three sections covered. I'll go into conclusion phase. Yeah. The importance of 3C as a disciplines, or the need of a 3C game designer, depends on genre to genre and studio to studio. Like in this case with visual novels, where you don't really need an exclusive 3C game designer, but that doesn't mean that you disregard all focus on making the core interactions feel right. Seemingly small decisions can have a drastic impact on your overall gameplay experience. In this example, I want to take a simple feature like jumping and see how different it can be from game to game. In Tomb Raider, you have to care about your character speed, your angle of jump, and then giving the input at the right time to initiate the jump. But in Prince of Persia, you don't really care about your speed or angle. Focusing on giving your input should be the priority in this game. And then we have AC, where you don't even need to time your input. You can hold your input and the character navigates across the environment. And depending on what decisions you make as a designer, your gameplay experience and even your audience will vastly differ. I would say even my grandma could play AC, hold down the parkour button, and feel good about playing the game. But I would not say the same for Tomb Raider. Elements like motion sickness and comfort creep into 3C because of their implications on core interactions. A variety of methods are being explored right now to grant players in VR greater freedom of movement while ensuring nobody feels any discomfort as a result of mismatch between what the body feels like and what the eyes see. With more motion based devices coming in, or input devices coming in general, and with their implications on core interactions, this comfort umbrella expands to fall under 3C as well. Simply put, if 3C, the core interactions are not done right, then you would have a hard time winning over your target audience. But remember, there's no good or bad 3Cs. It's all dependent on requirements of your game. Like in this case with Resident Evil series, where the clunky character controls and camera all come together to amplify the horror experience. And I'd like to add that such games with fixed cameras and other clunky features will keep getting made because, again, there's no good or bad design. It's about how you use them for your requirement. Now, with that, I would like to conclude my talk. There's a lot of depth to the topics I talked about, but for now, this is what I have. And I'd like to thank you all for listening in. I'll be ready to take any questions you have at me.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chandra, for your very deep, analytical, and very thorough explanation. I think I already prepared some questions before the presentation, but hearing your presentation give me a lot of new questions that I want to ask you. So the first thing is that because 3C is very important to the game and it impact everything, right, from the mechanic, from the gameplay. So during development, where do you decide what kind of interaction you should have? Is it the early or is it also evolving during the game development?
So, ideally, I would say 3C should be defined from the get go, but it might not always be the case. You have other systems as well where, hey, I want to make a 4X game where it's about expanding strategy or something like that. And in those cases, systems come first, then core interactions.
I
Uh,
see. So
yeah,
systems first before the 3Z, right?
but it's dependent on game to game. It's not there's no hard set and rule. If you're working on a platformer, 3C comes first.
First, I see. Okay. So, is there any case in your experience where the 3D mechanic is changed and then it also changed the system and the other mechanic uh, because of the
Yeah,
decision of the change in 3D?
it changes everything. Like as I've given the example with camera, simply changing the camera view of, like, even in AAA games where you have third person camera maybe on your back, bringing it closer to the character will change a lot of stuff. Like, oh, how does my running work? Like, you don't need to show the lower body when your camera is so close. You can hide a lot of things, and you don't need to show uh, if your character has any inventory or like on him where he can just like pick something up from his bag because it's not there in the camera. It's hidden. You can hide a
Hmm.
lot of stuff, but that's for 3C. In terms of systems, the good example I have is God of War, where since the camera is so close, they cannot do all the acrobatic actions which they did in their previous entries. They had to change everything because the camera is so close, and they wanted to keep it so close because they wanted the players to have an immersive experience.
I see, I see. Okay, okay. So I come from mobile game background, so I think very different. But I think from what you explain is that also in the Flappy Bird and Candy Crush, the 3C also takes important role. So I think in mobile game we are actually using mostly UX design. So what is the relation between 3C and UX? Is it the same thing or is a subset of the UX or it's totally different
So it depends on how
UX
you
design?
organize your team, and we have in Ubisoft Stockholm, we have a UX team, and we are supposed to collaborate with UX team as closely as we can, because 3C are in direct relation to the user
User
experience.
experience.
Yeah, and it could be the case where they're mixed. Depends. I don't know how other studios
I
work,
see.
how other teams work. And you might have seen me raise some examples about accessibility and stuff like that, or how players play their game uh, with input devices. I get most of this information about input lag, and how players are finding it difficult to play the game from UX team, and then we
I see.
both work together and form a solution where we're like, yeah, this is solving the issue, and you can go ahead.
I see. So it's like the collaboration, right, between the UX and the 3C. Okay. Okay. So another question is that from the game design theory in general, it's usually comes from psychology, right? Like the how the fun works. So, but for the 3Z, what is actually the so we also previously we have a cinematic animator, and all of the theory is based on cinema, like the movie. Okay. So but for the 3Z, what is the branch or of knowledge or the discipline that is the foundation of the 3Z that you
Hmm.
know of? Is it
um,
psychology or more than that?
I so this is a tough question. If you're asking about psychology, I'm not a psychology expert. But per your question, 3C employs a lot of psychological techniques, uh, like how much space do we allow for action to takes place in the screen, and or why do we have different buttons for Mario to do jump, which is one action. If you played the recent game Mario Odyssey, you can press multiple buttons for the same action, jump, because they don't care. They want kids to play the game, and kids can use whatever button they want to employ jump. But that doesn't mean that the game has complexity, doesn't have any complexity. If you play the game long enough, you'll know about hat jumps, and double triple jumps and stuff like that, and you'll slowly start to master them. There's good psychology behind these decisions, and but I wouldn't say that we're any psychological experts, if
I
that's your
see. I see.
question.
Okay, okay. I see. Okay. Okay, so another question is that how do you measure or how do you know when your 3D design is good enough or it's great or it still need a lot of improvement? Uh, is there any approach or benchmark or any way you use to measure the how good your design in 3D?
Yeah, so any feature we work on, we usually have a set of goals we expect from the final product, and uh, we might have benchmarks, as how you mentioned. And in Ubisoft, we have something called as levels of quality, uh,
Mm.
and what we do in this each level is that on the first level we can be like, hey, we have a very gray boxish, very bare bone minimum implementation, but on the second level we can be like, oh, it has more additional features, supporting features, and more VFX, SFX animations or something to amplify feedbacks, and we scale up depending on how much time we want to spend time uh, on the feature, how much budget do we have to spend time,
Mhm.
we consider accordingly. And we try, since we're a AAA studio, we try to hit our benchmarks at the minimum, and yeah, so that's how we do it.
I see. So, does it mean there is a lot of there is a team of tester who are testing your 3D design? Yeah.
Yeah, so
Oh,
any
I see.
feature we design and get them implemented, we also have documents, and I might have mentioned about metrics in my talk, where I can be like, hey, I have an animation which is a bow and arrow shoot, and I have it for zero point 0.2 milliseconds, and or something like that. Then I'll give more information on like how much distance does the arrow travel? 30
Mm.
meters, I don't know. Well, we have some information which we give to testers, and the testers can like use that information and correlate in between, like, oh, it's working as intended, it's not working as intended.
Oh,
And
I see, I
they can
see.
they also get creative and sometimes put up bugs which we do not expect at all, and then we collaborate from there.
I see. So the 3Z benchmark is all actually set from the start, right? This is what you want, and this is how the implementation and the QA testing. So it's very technical, I think. Instead of the experimental, it's very technical and metric based. The the measurement.
Yeah, but the measurements, they change, keep changing. I would say the example I have for this one is, if you've seen, I talked about God of War, their run speed, how quickly the character runs between environment. From what I've seen in their devlog videos, it kept changing till they released the game. Took years,
Yes,
took years of iteration to for them to finalize on a speed, and they, you cannot ascertain these
I
things
see.
from
I
the
see.
get go. You try your best. Yes, I have a set vision. We're gonna do this, and we'll face some problems, and then we iterate from there.
See, but how long does it take on average from the idea and the intent design to get it right? Or is there any like extreme case that you can share? What is the average and the extreme case that you have
Yeah,
worked
so
on?
that is true, because I was gonna say that it depends on feature to feature, and we cannot exactly quantify the average time. Like the run example which I just explained, it can take years for you to nail that right. But there are simpler examples, maybe more in like a dodge, where you can be like, I have to get this right, and also confirm this, so that other departments like combat, if I say I have a 4-meter dodge which is like of zero point 0.5 seconds or something like that, and the combat team can be like, oh, I have an enemy which attacks for so and so time and distance, now I know how much you dodge and I can plan my actions according to that or something. So it
Hmm,
depends on requirements. If it needs to be finalized, it will be finalized. If it does not need to be finalized, if it's floofy in everybody's head, then it'll take time, maybe. Yeah,
I
so
see. I see. I see. Okay. So also you talk in your presentation about input lag, right? Like when we press the input, there's a delay before the response, and the user can process the response. So and it also impact like the aspect of FPS drop. If you are for a console, we maybe we don't worry about that, but for the PC, we have a lot of high end spec and the low end spec. So as a designer, how do you handle FPS drop, and what kind of device you use as a benchmark? Is it the high end or you design for the low end? Is there
so
any case?
in terms of AAA games, we usually go for a set uh, recommended specifications, and I think this Starlink team which I worked with, we were in collaboration with Ubisoft Toronto at the time, and they made the game for PS4. They did not think about PC at all. You know,
Oh,
like
it, oh, I
PC,
see. I
we don't
see.
see PC.
So
And
it's
then, yeah, and then when we looked at it, we're like, oh, PC, how do we do that? And we had to make new options and like new graphical or display options to make it possible to even like work on PC. We had issues with mouse, where if you turned the mouse fast enough, the character would like
oh, I
glitch
see.
out. And so it depends on team to team on how the recommended, how they go for tech. In our example, in our current team, if you know about Ubisoft Scalar, we're using cloud based technology to power our game. So I don't know the limitations of our tech. It could be, I don't know.
Very different. I see. I see, I see. So, you are focusing on the console first, like which is very divine instead of the PC,
Yeah,
which is very okay. But I think for the mobile game, it's very hard to do, right?
yeah.
If you're for the mobile, because there's a lot of
I mean,
device specification for
separate
mobile.
sizes, screen
Yes,
sizes,
yes, also.
specifications. Yeah, it's complex.
Okay, okay. So regarding the 3C, what is a good starting point for people to learn 3C? Like, is there any good reference? Like, uh,
So I would say this is why I wanted to do this talk, because there's no good references out there which
oh, so
can help
this is the
students.
good reference, right?
Yeah, that's why I wanted to do a fundamental stock, because if I Google 3C or 3C game design, almost
Yes,
nothing comes up,
yes,
and most people don't even know what 3C means. I had a good, funny conversation with a colleague the other day who is in our studio, in a marketing team or something, and I was talking with her, and she's like, "What is 3C? Is it cookie, cakes, and champagne?" And nobody knows about 3C, and that's not to blame anyone. As you know, even people in our team completely do not know about 3C, and in that's why I'm doing this, and I want to put out more information where people can know about this discipline.
I see. Very cool. So hopefully this session will be the starting point for people around the world to learn about 3C, and we'll go in history. Okay.
Yeah,
So now we also want to ask some question from our audience that they submit earlier. So this from Akmal Irfan Maulana. Uh, so the point is that what is the biggest challenge or the most toughest challenge you have ever have in your career, and how you solve it?
so for that question, I would say the toughest challenge is communication. It's a designer's bane of existence. You need to communicate with other disciplines, making people understand why we need X feature in our game. Like, why do you need smoke FX for our gun? Cutting it would save time, but I have to convince people it's like smoke. It amplifies the
Mhm.
experience in so and so way. Eh, I have to I have to make them think like me, uh, ship them on my designs. Uh, Usually, I do this by talking about my designs from the get go, and I get their trust, and it feels like we are collectively working towards this feature instead of me dropping a feature in front of people and be like, surprise, I want this, do this. It doesn't work like that. So it's more of a building trust,
Trust with, I
and
see.
yeah,
So it's,
between
I
each other.
see.
Yeah,
So it's also not only communication but also persuasion, right?
yeah,
Like to persuade other to believe on your ideas and vision.
yeah. It's
Okay.
especially when people don't know what 3C is and people don't understand what the value of 3Cs.
I see, I see. Okay, I think it's very clear. For Akmal Irfan, maybe you can get the answer. Okay, next we have another question from Subrata, and this good question. So during prototyping, it's we usually most like placeholder, like only the button, the engraph control. So how do you get the feeling and decide whether this 3Z and this idea is fun and will work or not during, because the game is not ready yet and only the placeholder. Is there any
Yeah,
tips or trick that you want to share about this?
yeah, yeah. I before I do that, I think there was one more thing about AAA versus non-AAA, which I saw in the
Oh, yes,
previous
yes,
question. I
yes,
wanted
yes.
to
Sorry.
also think about that. When it comes to non-AAA, I focus on making features for specific audience or specific reasons, like we need to hit KPIs in some way, or we need to fill this gap of getting players into play our game in some way. We need to fix the onboarding of the game in some way. But in AAA, it's more about supporting the game direction and polishing features. We follow the director and we follow what's been stated to hit those goals from a direction. So yeah, so that's for the that question part. Just wanted to hit at it, and then we have Subrata's question. This is impossible. It is completely fine to get this wrong. Industry professionals get this wrong. We designers put our thoughts from paper to execution, and not everything works as you expect them to. uh, Usually my say is, decide what you want, test it out, and iterate from there. Seek problems and seek solutions for those problems which you find. I would say iteration is the way to go, and there's no perfect world scenario for this question where I can be like, hey, I have something which works, which I can get a sense of from the beginning of a development period, especially for AAA games where we spend time, 3 years or 4 years of time making on building the game, and it would be very hard for me to look at future and be like, 4 years, how will this feature pan out? Nobody knows.
I see, I see. Okay. So, is there any tips or how to enhance your sense on the during the prototyping? Because yeah, is there any habit that you do and to ensure that you can do the iteration and you can have better chance to
Yeah,
get it
yeah.
right?
So usually I just launch games, play them, break them down, uh, and for now, since we don't have many articles or many other videos explaining the craft behind 3C, it's mostly been self-exploration. Uh,
Hmm.
and I launch up a game and be like, I want to test how the character moves. I spend a lot of time just moving the character left and right with the analog stick, trying to see what happens, what behaviors are happening, why are they happening, and is it a good design, bad design for them, for their requirements. See, is it fitting their game, not fitting their game? How is this information useful to our game? So a lot of questions come up when I'm like just playing games and like breaking them down, and it's very different from when you play as a player, where you don't care about doing this. You're just here for going through the level, getting to finish your objective and stuff like that. Most of the times I spend hours in a single area not doing anything, just
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 trying it out,
yeah,
testing.
keep trying it out to have an estimation of like all the conditions. Oh, have us dodge, but what happens if I dodge into a wall? Does the dodge quit? Does the dodge get clamped, you know? Or if it's a short wall, does the dodge go above the wall? Some games do that where it's just like walls over.
Mm.
A
I
lot of
see.
questions. Yeah.
Okay, okay, okay. So we have another question from Jamie Smith, which is also cool, but maybe maybe hard to answer, right? So he asked, what is the difference between a good 3C designer and a great 3C designer? So,
Mhm.
or are you considering you are as a good, or are you considering yourself as a great 3C designer?
I would say for myself, I am in no means of a great designer, I think, but I can know the difference on what it takes for one to be a great designer. I would say um, most the biggest point which I see in a lot of juniors is they have a lot of internal bias and they're fighting with it. In the case of like, oh, I want to have a grappling hook in the game, and I'm like, yeah, that sounds cool, but why? Is it, and he's like, oh no, that looks cool. You see the rope and how it latches onto things, and then you swing. And, I'm like, okay, but why? What's the reason we? And
To have it.
yeah, yeah. So usually people do that. People may come up with designs because they like for themselves, and that's the differentiating factor when you have a designer who is not making designs for themselves but also making it for the market, for the target audience. How would a 40-year-old female play my grappling hook? How does she interact with it? um, that's a not a direct question that we answer, but just giving you a context of the thought process
I
involved.
see.
And
I see.
there's one more point to this. um, when we have problems, I would say, uh, when we have run, and as I mentioned, God of War, people tweak the run a lot of for a long duration. And usually why these issues happen is because when you have a problem, you look at the biggest problem which is in front of your eyes, but you do not look at the tiny problems which are under it. There could be many problems under it, and your end product could be a solution of all of them. But fresh designers don't look at the all the problems. They only look at the biggest one, and like, yeah, they make a solution, and then the other ones start to be bigger, and then they start to make solutions for that. So yeah.
I see. I see. So I think also have like the high level uh thinking, analytical thinking, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wait,
Okay.
there's another point which I could say. It's a lot of designers push their designs even though if there is no budget or tech to support it.
I
And
see.
yeah,
Visibility, right? So you
yeah,
also have sense of visibility.
this is one of the biggest one, because you might have the coolest idea which works the best to your game, but it takes a year to develop that. What do we do? You know, there's time constraints involved. And as a designer, it would be smarter for you to find solutions where you do not overshoot your features in such a way where they're a moonshot,
I
and
see. I
you work
see.
within realistic expectations, because maybe your next idea might not be as cool as your first one, but it's you cannot compare the feeling most of the time. Maybe it's like 95%, 90% of it. I don't know.
I see. Okay, so maybe if I want to summarize, I think your first point is that he creates the game for the market instead of for himself,
Yeah,
and doesn't focus on the his own bias, right? And the second one is that think in a high level instead of the everything at once and make a priority. And the third one is that apa, he also have a sense of visibility and knows the cost of every design and which one is visible or not. Okay, okay. I think this is
there
very
could be
much.
many more
Yeah,
stuff, but
yeah,
I
see.
don't know right now.
Okay, okay. So we also have a question from the live stream, from the audience.
Mhm.
Live question. We have from Bima Arif Putra. He asked, "Do different camera makes different improvement for the performance? Like, what is the process for improvement is different for different camera from the third person, first person, and the top down? I think
uh, Performance, I'm thinking it's more in
the
terms of a technical performance.
no,
uh,
I think what he meant is that the performance of the 3Z, like
oh, okay. So yeah, it depends on your the game which you want to make is my first point. The FPS third person top down, anything works. There is no, it's not saying that hey, third person is always the better camera which will immerse you more into the experience. If you play Flappy Bird, you know how immersed you can get into that game because you're looking for that tap duration and stuff like that. And it's a side scroller. uh, the camera does make a difference in terms of immersion. uh, when you did, like in the case of Flappy Bird, I selected my side scrolling layout, but now I'm getting removing the barrier of the player's perspective towards the device, where you feel both of you are in sync. And as you've seen in my presentation with the Sifu example, you'll constantly go around with like, what's happening with my camera? I have to like change it, and
Mm.
like it takes out of the experience, it brings you out of the immersion. So this is where the differentiating factors come in terms of performance, I guess. Yeah.
I see, I see. Okay. Okay, so maybe for Bima, jadi kameranya also impact ke emosi emosi pemain dan apakah nanti dia bakal tertarik keluar dari experience yang diintended ya. Okay. So we also have another question. We have three, I think, from Div. So because you are talking about communication and how important is it, is there any specific technique to communicate or persuade your team effectively?
Oh
Your
yes,
ideas to the team.
I have a go-to things which I do mostly, and uh, the best way to get everybody inducted into your
In the
vision,
front.
yeah, into your vision, is to speak with them from the get-go before you even work on a documentation. And I've had scenarios where I have an idea but I don't know how to explain it to
Hmm,
through voice or through text. And then I usually go around and find pictures, gifs, and videos, and be like, you see this, you see this, I mean, we are kind of expecting this. And people, uh, and most of the time, what happens is that any way you communicate, the person it's a different person. What you have in your head will never be translated 100% to the other person at all. That is not a possibility. And you would have you would need to find a sweet balance where they have their imagination, and it comes to you, and your
I
imagination
see.
goes to you, and you work together.
I see. So you are using media to make to tell your ideas from visually, right? So
Yeah,
like a benchmark. So at least they can get it easier if you have a
yeah.
reference. Okay. So I think related to this, is that any how much impact does the COVID and the work from home to that aspect of communication? Like is explaining ideas when you
Yeah.
are all in office and in remote, how difference it does it make? How
um
challenging?
So I would say, in office you can be more expressive, use your body, facial expressions, and a lot of other stuff. Have a physical board and draw stuff and stuff like that. And COVID has certain limitation, but it has changed the way we designers work in the industry, I would say. And most of the times, I'm in a call. I cannot be ultra expressive because there's a window which
Hmm,
is limiting me. And uh, most of the times I'm satisfied if they get what I have in my mind for like 50%. I'm happy with that. We can work from there.
I see.
And uh, gifts gifts are the best way. And finding relatable gifts. If a person looks at something which they watched previously, and they know about it, like a lot of people watch Office, and if you put up an Office gif, people will be like, oh, I like that. I now like your idea because of your gift choice. So a lot of things.
I see, I see. Okay, okay. So we also have one other question, but in Indonesia it's already near the Maghrib, the prayer times. So I think so okay, maybe we will answer the last question from the Satyaloka. So in previous session we have the cinematography artist, and he give a lot of presentation about camera
Yeah,
from cinematography perspective. So, is does the cinematography also impact the 3C? How much
yeah.
uh, relation between the cinematography to the 3C in camera aspect?
Camera, when it especially comes to camera, the rule of thirds, the dolly cam, there's a lot of techniques we take from film to apply into our games. And in the case of RDR2, I think they have an option where you can enable cinematic camera at any point, and the game now shows you running through the, like, follows you from a different angles and perspective. So when they're giving it to be a choice, it's not forced upon you. And the important point is that what I when I'm required to do things, the camera lets me do my things without it fighting with me. And
Hmm.
RDR2, it's a choice. You can let it fight with you if you want it. Go ahead, turn on the cinematic camera if you so want. And and it's really immersive in a different sense when you have the cinematic camera and when you're roaming around on your horse through the forest or through the hills, and the camera is like finding new angles to, like, look at you. It's a different feeling than the camera always being behind you. uh, and yeah, so as long as it's not, you're not fighting with it, it's fine.
I see, I see. Okay. Okay, so we also have question from Yodi and Preview Prakasa, but I'm very sorry that I missed the question. And this and we have the apa we have the time. I think maybe one last question from Yodi before we close the session. The question is that is there any practice that you can in your studio to how much detail you go from for each feature and the technical to the technical team? How much detail do you go? Is it every detail, or you go just uh, the summary version, or is there
Yeah,
any
so
approach?
it's been different with Ubisoft in India and here. I would say in India, I would used to give every detail. Like, you take a step and you have a VFX, like a particle popping up, and I mentioned that that, hey, we need so and so VFX. But here, since we're still in early phases of production and we still don't know, still trying to figure out a lot of things, it's useless to go into a lot of detail because we need to first find the core
Hmm.
of the feature, if it works or not, and then we'll iterate it from there, and add more details as we
I
go ahead.
see, I see, I
Yeah,
see. Maybe from the idea, the core, and as you go, you add more detail instead of the going all detail at the get go, right? Okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chandra, for your time and your very insightful session and sharing knowledge to a lot of people here and the audience. And I think we have a lot of audience here in live stream, but I'm sorry we cannot have a lot more discussion because we have the limit in time.
yeah,
Okay, so mungkin buat teman-teman sebelum kita tutup ada beberapa announcement. Jadi buat teman-teman yang ikutan sesi ini bisa mengisi link buat memberikan feedback. Jadi nanti kalau misalkan ngisi linknya ini nanti bisa dapetin sesi presentasinya akan dikirimkan via email. Jadi mungkin buat teman-teman yang pengen dapetin slide-nya bisa langsung ngisi ke feedback ini. Lalu juga buat teman-teman game dev yang pengen ke game dev ini udah ada IGSI batch 5 udah mau dimulai. Jadi buat teman-teman yang belum register langsung register aja. Nanti kalau udah register bakal dikasih akses ke dokumentasi semua sesi SSR Talk dari awal sampai habis. Jadi ini buat 100 register pertama aja. Jadi buat teman-teman langsung join. Lalu uh, hari Senin nanti akan ada IGSI Bootcamp webinar di mana dia akan ngebahas beberapa sesi sesi buat IGSI dan nanti akan juga ada banyak info tentang IGSI-nya sendiri, program-program yang lain, benefit termasuk juga ada pemenang dari Game Jam IGSI 2022. Nah, buat yang kalian yang belum regis, langsung aja subscribe ke sosial medianya IGSI buat dapetin info lebih lanjut dan join dengan program-programnya. Oke, thank you for Mr. Chandra for your time. Hopefully, this session will be as intended to be the starting point for people to learn 3C, and this will be go to the Google page, search rank one when you are googling the 3C designer. I think, hopefully. Okay, thank you for your time, and thank you for everyone who watched who joined this session. hopefully the knowledge is impactful to you. And see you again in next session in SSR Talks. Thank you. Goodbye.
See you guys.